Welcome to Saturday's Warrior. The Big 12 has released its schedule for the 2024 through 2027 seasons, and we're going to give our response and reaction to that from both the Big 12 and BYU fan perspectives. But before we do, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, it's been a couple days since this news came out, and we've been trying to find time to get this video together, but things have been busy, and then when we were going to record, the news about Jake Retzloff had just come out, so we thought it was important to get that video up. So now I'm up early Saturday morning to be able to find time to record this video, because later today I am driving up to Morgantown to catch the BYU West Virginia game. So overall reaction to the schedule is, I don't know, perhaps I give it about a B. And so let's get into what it is about the schedule that's good and what's bad. So we're going to start off with the Big 12's announcement. And it says that a few interesting things, that the model was developed with a priority on geography, historic matchups, and rivalries, as well as competitive balance. And it also says that they are going to make sure that each team has at least one home and away over 4 years, and some matchups will be over 3 seasons, and some will be all 4 seasons. And what's interesting you'll see is that there were only 4 matchups that were protected over those 4 years. And so we'll look at and see which ones those are. It says matchups in 2024 that were also played in 2023 will not repeat at the same site. Good to know. And lastly, the conference looked to maintain the current 5-4, 4-5 home and away rotation for all 16 members to minimize non-conference scheduling disruptions. Other important factors were balancing annual travel by distance and time zones, as well as maintaining connectivity to rivalries without compromising a balanced rotation for all teams. And then the last of this is just filler. So they've provided which teams are going to play over the 4-year period, but they haven't provided the dates yet. So let's take a look at this. I found that the most helpful way to view all this was this matrix provided by Reddit CFB on Twitter. So if you want, go check them out. But you notice here the dark red indicates which teams will be playing for all 4 years. And so there's only a few matchups. We have the Baylor TCU, and I don't know why I started at the bottom there. We have both the Arizona and Arizona State rivalries, BYU, Utah, and then Kansas and Kansas State. None of the others are protected that same way. Having said that, the teams that'll be playing 3 times generally make, I think, for the most part, a lot of sense and maintain a lot of other rivalries that I guess are considered second tier. So I don't know how these 4 were selected when there's other ones like Farmageddon, Kansas State, and Iowa State that I think is a big time in terms of the Big 12 rivalries, and that was not protected for all 4 years. But even for some of these other games that won't be playing all 4 years, so let's say Cincinnati and West Virginia, maybe that's not a traditional rivalry. I think it could be. They were both in the Big East together for a spell, and they are definitely the closest geographic rivals that this has a chance. Now, forced rivalries don't usually or always take. I mean, just take Utah and Colorado, for example. But I think West Virginia and Cincy could turn into one. And so it would be good that even though they're not playing all 4 years, to at least have that game and any other potential big-time rivalry games played on that last weekend of the season, Thanksgiving weekend, rivalry week. That's when we want to see these games. I have to assume that BYU and Utah is going to be moved there, at least for as long as Utah's in the conference. We know that they're headed to the Big Ten really soon. But in the meantime, having them having those big games at the end of the season, because I think it's weird. I mean, I know there's tradition behind it, so if so, keep them where they're at. You have Red River Rivalry, which won't be in conference anymore, but that's always played at I believe it's the Texas State Fair. Whatever it is, it's played at that weekend. Same with Bedlam, from what I understand, it's always played earlier. So then you keep those games earlier in the season. But anyway, I hope they do that. I do like that they have the Baylor and TCU matchup protected. So we'll see. I think generally this does a good job because other models may not allow for every team to play each other, twice, do at least a home and away over the course of 4 years. So I think that's the biggest proponent or biggest, pro for this matrix. And I think it does do a good job of keeping a lot of regionality. But let's look at some of the examples on how it, because this is kind of hard to visualize all this. So let's pull up some of the visualizations. So I started with BYU, obviously, and looking at this, so you can see I have the team in red will be who the protected rival for all 4 years, and then the orange circles are indicating who they'll be playing 3 times, and then everybody else will be a home and away over the 4 year span. And looking at this, I mean, having Utah and the Arizona schools makes a lot of sense. I mean, these are all old WAC rivals, so this is really good. I was wondering how much they were going to try to have BYU and Colorado playing, and it looks like they're not trying to force that issue because they don't really have nearly as much history as a lot of these other schools out west. Kansas was an interesting one. I don't mind that. We'll be playing Kansas for 3 times, but really I would have liked to have Baylor in that spot, and because that's looking like it's going to turn into a fun rivalry between these two programs. I would have loved to have had Baylor at least 3 times over a 4 year span. And then UCF is very interesting, and we'll look at it later and talk about that. But BYU's going down to UCF twice over that time period. It seems kind of weird, and have UCF playing BYU 3 times. I guess if they're going to be traveling anyway and they're having BYU come to them twice, maybe it's not a big deal. I do think perhaps BYU wanted this, that they wanted to get into Florida a couple times, and for recruiting, who knows? But so some things make a lot of sense, others less so. Utah, on the other hand, all of these teams make a lot of sense, and I'll talk about this too a little bit more detail. But I had some ideas on potential scheduling solutions, and I posted a video on that. But these were the exact teams that I had Utah playing in protected rivalry. So I'm glad that they're playing all of them. I'm glad they have TCU. Would have liked Baylor or TCU for BYU as well. So anyway, this one makes a lot of sense. This is kind of how you draw it up. UCF. Oh yeah, because I want to see. Okay, it's interesting. BYU was coming that far. Well, what are they doing for UCF? They have some of the teams that are a bit closer. Iowa State, I think, is just about as close as anyone along, from that old Big 12. And I would have preferred to have Houston, who has a little bit more history with UCF, and kind of build off of that space race rivalry. I think, again, it would be a little bit forced, but it would make a little bit more sense than Baylor. And then BYU I talked about, but Colorado, so now they have 2 teams in that western chunk of the conference that are paired with UCF. It seems odd to me, but UCF is a hard one to schedule for. And then Cincinnati, so let's see what they're doing with the other Eastern teams. This one makes a little more sense. You see kind of those 4 teams right down the middle there. Again, about as close as you can get for Cincy, and then they're 2 of their closer neighbors. And a lot of people have Iowa State and Cincy paired because they're relatively close geographically, so you're getting that. So yeah, this one makes a lot of sense. Let's look at some of the others. The Texas schools, and I'm not going to go through each program, just a few examples here. But Texas Tech and a lot of the Texas schools are playing each other a lot. I'm glad they're still with Oklahoma State. Arizona State, that was a big one because that was an old rivalry, and I think that could be a fun one that gets reignited. Also, I'm glad I mentioned they're still playing the Texas schools, but Houston and Texas Tech has been turning into a fun matchup, and I think that has a chance to turn into a really fun rivalry. So I'm glad we're still getting that matchup most years. And then West Virginia, that one's a little bit farther off, but Again, I think that one's more about getting West Virginia a little bit more presence in Texas, perhaps. Which, by the way, I should say it looked like, and I don't know, I haven't done this for every single school, but it looked like every year, especially, it looked like every school was playing in Texas at least once every year. I could be wrong on that, but they will be playing Texas schools every year. So I think that's important for recruiting, probably for a lot of these schools. And then let's look at the kind of the Midwest teams, and this again makes a lot of sense when looking at this. And I thought, okay, that's cool. I assumed that Colorado would be playing a lot of the Midwest schools a lot. The old Big Eight rivalries and reignite some of those. But I think Kansas State was the only one on there. Yeah, so they really elected to pair them more with the Pac schools. It was also announced along with the not along with, but at similar time as the announcement for the Big 12 earlier this week, that BYU is going to be having a home and away with SMU. And so now we have the 2024 schedule, not all the dates, but the teams that BYU will be playing. And this is actually relatively tough. We have two out of conference games in Wyoming and SMU, or at Wyoming and at SMU. And as Wyoming showed, that is not an easy place to go play. They just beat Texas Tech at the beginning of this year. And yes, Tech is down, but Wyoming is shown to be a tough out, especially at home. So that's tough, old rivalry. And I do think it's interesting with adding Utah and the Arizona schools and then having Wyoming out of conference. I mean, this is starting to look like the old WAC a little bit. But at SMU, so if we set up that series again, it counts as a Power Five. This is a school that's new to the Power Five level, so you get kind of credit for the Power Five, for scheduling Power Five without actually playing a P5 opponent. And then I also like that we're playing at SMU first, even though that does give us two away and out of conference, because once SMU is more established and presumably up to speed and more competitive at the P5 level, they'll be coming to Provo. So we get the tougher matchup earlier on when they'll still be transitioning. So presumably that is a benefit for BYU. Then looking at the rest of this matchup, I mean, if this were this year, this would actually be pretty good. ASU's down a little bit, but they're on the up, so it's hard to say where they'll be next year. Baylor, they're having a down year, but they could be, we'll see what happens, if Dave Aranda keeps his job, what happens with all that. But I don't assume that Baylor's going to be just as bad next year. Arizona also seems to be on the rise. So, both Arizona schools have bad record, but they've both had some very close games against good teams. So we'll see where they're at next year. Houston's been down, but has also shown it can compete with some good teams. And then OSU started out bad, but has proven to be really tough. We got Kansas again, and then Kansas State on there, which is fun, but was definitely going to be a tough team. And then UCF, their record I think is worse than the quality of that team. They have had injuries at QB and had some close losses against some good teams. So, and then Utah is obviously going to come in and rule the conference. So, overall, I think that's a good schedule, a good variety of new members, PAC members, and some more legacy members, as well as difficulty. It's hard to say where all these teams are going to be, but there's a lot of games that should at least be winnable for BYU in 2024. Now, this is BYU's graphic on the announcement, and I won't get into all the out-of-conference games for each year, but looking at these just real quick, it's interesting. We have West Virginia again, and so we're playing West Virginia this year. Then they come to BYU, and then we have them home, but then we end up getting them away again. And so we'll actually be playing West Virginia 3 times over 5 years, 2 times there. But I guess those sort of things are inevitable. But in 2025, where we only have 4 home games and we're traveling, Arizona is, depending on how they are, that could be a quasi-home game. Colorado's not far, and we still get into Texas, and then we get a couple Midwest. Yes, Cincy in Ohio is technically considered Midwest. So, and then in 26, this is pretty good. We get both Baylor and TCU that year, which would be fun, and get to, again, as I mentioned before, I think everyone makes it to Texas once every year. And then we're also going all the way to UCF that year. So Disney World trip, I guess. For me, it's more Harry Potter World. It sounds more interesting, but that's a different debate. And then we have both Arizona schools at home, which I thought was interesting. Usually they tend to offset those with schools from the same state, so that is interesting. And then, and then we have 5 at home and 4 away, and one that is away is in Utah. So you're not really traveling real far. So I guess that kind of compensates for going to Florida, Kansas, and Texas. So not too bad. And then lastly, 2027. Again, there's only 4 home games, and then quite a bit of traveling in this one. Um, all the way back to West Virginia again. Arizona is not too bad, but then a few to the Midwest, a couple to the Midwest, and then down to Texas again. So overall, I like a lot of the matchups, a lot of the variety, and it looks pretty good. I think that it's played out pretty well for BYU. They've gotten a lot of the matchups that they want. Again, I think the biggest kicker is not being able to see Baylor more, but we will live with that. So, in summary, I think the Big 12 did a pretty good job. You have to keep in mind that there are 16 schools that you have to get to agree to this and sign off, and there's probably a lot of different needs and agendas that the Big 12 had to compromise on in order to bring this all together. And so I'm guessing, where there are some head scratchers like Colorado, UCF, I'm guessing those are just part of the compromising to be able to make this all work. And we knew it wasn't going to be perfectly clean. And so I think they did a good job. And again, when you're traveling a lot, you get access to states like Florida or Texas, so that could be a benefit in a lot and part of the decision making as well. So we think it was good. Just a little bit bummer on some of these rivalries that they're not happening a little bit more. Again, for BYU, it's cool that we'll be seeing Kansas a lot, and maybe that'll turn into a rivalry in basketball, which maybe is a bad thing because then BYU is going to get Kansas really showing up for those games. But really, I was a little bummed not having Baylor on there at least 3 times. But for the most part, I think it was pretty good. Let me know in the comments what you think of the schedule. Are you pretty happy with it? What matchups are we missing out on, or did the Big 12 miss the boat on and getting together more frequently, either 3 or 4 times? Let me know all that in the comments. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe, all the good stuff. Hit the bell, you name it. And we will see you next time. Go Cougs.